Hey there friends, my name is Jim, and as you can see from my and many other channels' recent videos, everybody can't stop talking about Ukraine. It's the story of the month, and as the fighting goes on, I imagine less and less people will keep track as more people realize that Ukraine had no chance from the start without NATO ground support, and we move into a new world where Russia owns Ukraine. The real question after that is, what does this mean for the rest of the world? Once Putin's finished mopping up the mess he's made and licking his wounds, Ukraine will be his and nobody can really say dick about it. And that, coupled with the Biden administration's piss-poor job evacuating Afghanistan, will show the world that the US is no longer the single superpower with the vast military power that we're used to having in charge for the last 100 or so years. And it looks like the elites have done it. They were so worried about increasing the vast wealth that they already control that they broke the foundation of the country, and now all they have left is a rotten corpse with the USA stamped on the outside of it. And the scavengers are a-coming. Just before this whole thing started, China and Russia made a joint statement outlining their plans for the coming world, with the US being in a less prominent position. It was purposefully verbose, probably to keep us short attention span Westerners from reading the whole thing, but there are several key details in it that give us an idea of what they plan on doing from here on out. Alongside that, Saudi Arabia has thumbed its nose at Biden, and many times now, from ignoring his public pleas to pump more oils to straight up not answering phone calls from him. And now it's starting to look like China's making a deal to buy oil from them in their currency, the Yuan, pretty much breaking the Petro Dollar, which the US will not allow. Basically, Trump was right when he said that the Biden administration would destroy America, and boy should we have listened. And this is the part where I remind you guys that you are how this information gets out, so if you like this video, feel free to share it with a friend, send it to your family, send it to somebody who needs to hear this information. And if you think what I do is actually valuable, feel free to support me at Locals Patreon or at my website at jimmyjams.xyz, linked below in the description. Now let's get into it. So, we're going to have to start today by flashing back to the Winter Olympics. Russia had not yet invaded Ukraine, though they were stationing troops at the border, and Xi Jinping decided to put out a joint statement between him and Vladimir Putin. It was about 5,000 words, the most boring legalese and platitudes you've ever seen, which I really think was on purpose in order to keep us Westerners from reading it. They know we need a burger after each paragraph. Though there was a lot for them to talk about, I want to highlight just a few passages to give you an idea of what I mean. First off, a bit ironically with hindsight, they call out the US for using force unilaterally against sovereign nations. Clearly, he's talking about how we invade countries willy-nilly and justify it however we need to, and they plan to put an end to that, though they use pretty flowery language to hide it. They then go on saying how every country deserves to have its own style of democracy, stating, quote, "There is no one-size-fits-all template to guide countries in establishing democracy. A nation can choose such forms and methods of implementing democracy that would best suit its particular state based on its social and political system, its historical background, traditions, and unique cultural characteristics. It is only up to the people of the country to decide whether their state is a democratic one." And then a few paragraphs down it says, quote, "The sides believe that the advocacy of democracy and human rights must not be used to put pressure on other countries. They oppose the abuse of democratic values and interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states under the pretext of protecting democracy and human rights, and any attempts to incite divisions and confrontation in the world. The sides call on the international community to respect cultural and civilizational diversity and the rights of peoples of different countries to self-determination. They stand ready to work together with all the interested partners to promote genuine democracy." Again, many times the US says they need to go do regime change somewhere because they're not what we consider democratic. This is them calling us out. It's also saying that what they consider democracy is different to the way we talk about it, and if they want to do something we wouldn't consider democratic, like the Uyghur Muslim concentration camps in China, they're just gonna do it. They're using democracy as kind of a catch-all phrase to say government. So saying, just because your democracy is one way doesn't mean we can't do democracy another. Maybe with less democratic voting, but it's still democracy. Either way, it's the same thing we do to hide our intentions behind the language of democratic processes. Then, a bit later in the joint statement, they get to the part that concerns their territories, with China promising to agree to any place Russia considers sovereign and Russia agreeing to do the same. This is what I think was an agreement between them, a kind of, you get my back when I grab Ukraine, and I get yours when you go after Taiwan. So from Article 3 of the statement, quote, "The sides reaffirm their strong mutual support for protection of their core interests, state sovereignty and territorial integrity, and oppose interference by external forces in their internal affairs. The Russian side reaffirms its support for the One China principle, confirms that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and opposes any forms of independence of Taiwan. Russia and China stand against attempts by external forces to undermine security and stability in their common adjacent regions, intend to counter interference by outside forces in internal affairs of sovereign countries under any pretext, oppose color revolutions, and will increase cooperation in the aforementioned areas. This is what I mean about it being ridiculously full of flowery language and platitudes while still hiding some threatening language under the surface. And that's what I think comes next for China. Once Russia's finally taken Ukraine and finished licking its wounds, China will be watching with bated breath. If the US and NATO aren't powerful enough to push Russia back into what we consider its territory, I think China will take the opportunity to officially annex Taiwan. I mean, look at Hong Kong. For all the talk and flag waving and protests, they've basically been successfully absorbed into the rest of China, and why would Taiwan be any different? The problem for the rest of the world is that Taiwan is responsible for more than 60% of the world's semiconductor foundries, without which the world will grind to a halt. Have you ever noticed how expensive even used cars are right now? That's because COVID massively hit the semiconductor supply chains, and anything that needs them is going to cost more. That includes any types of electronics, DVD players, coffee machines, refrigerators, anything that has an electrical circuit board inside of it is going to require something from Taiwan. Now, take that raise in price and multiply it by China, and you start to notice the issue. Plus, those chips aren't just in consumer technology. Actually, they make 60% of all the all of the semiconductors, but 93% of the most sophisticated semiconductors, the kind you use in intercontinental ballistic missiles and MRADs and different types of weaponry, are made in Taiwan, and that whole problem becomes a lot bigger. With just this one simple annexation, and China controls the world, and all they're waiting for is the fallout from Russia's invasion to settle. If everything goes well, and by that I mean Putin gets to move his borders over and nobody starts chucking nukes, well, then the stage is set. The US no longer being the global superpower means we're in a new era, where the rules aren't just made by the United States. If they can't respond militarily, what are we good for? We sold out our manufacturing base years and years ago to China just for the power of our elites having more money, and we have no culture to speak of. The one thing we do have up our sleeve, however, has always been the Petro Dollar. The Petro Dollar refers to the idea that in order to buy oil from Saudi Arabia as another country, first you have to transfer whatever your native currency is into United States dollar bills. It comes from a decades-long agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia saying that if we supply them with our military might, they will only sell oil with US dollars, and that's the reason we'd be able to keep our heads above water with inflation. The only reason our massive spending over the last couple years haven't directly translated into like a potato costing you $10,000 is due to this. When we print more money, it goes all over the world, so inflation's more spread out. But what if we can no longer back it up? The whole point of it was our military being superior, but now that we're facing another losing battle, it seems like the Saudis may be ready to move on. From Yahoo News, Saudi Arabia reportedly considering accepting Yuan instead of dollar for oil sales. And this comes from... oh, no byline, okay. Saudi and Chinese officials are in talks to price some of the Gulf nations' oil sales in yuan rather than dollars or euros, the Wall Street Journal reported today, citing people familiar with the matter. The two nations have intermittently discussed the matter for 6 years, but talks have reportedly stepped up in 2022, with Riyadh disgruntled over the United States' nuclear negotiations with Iran and its lack backing for Saudi Arabia's military operation in neighboring Yemen. That seems a little bit ridiculous considering we've been selling tons and tons of weapons to Saudi Arabia for the express purpose of killing these poor Yemenis children. But moving on, nearly 80% of global oil sales are priced in dollars, and since the mid-1970s, the Saudis have exclusively used the dollar for oil trading as part of a security agreement with the US government, according to the journal. The talks are the latest in an ongoing effort by Beijing both to make its currency tradable in international oil markets and strengthen its relationship with the Saudis specifically. China previously aided Riyadh in construction of ballistic missiles and consultation on nuclear power. So as you can see, that is them taking our spot. We are the people the Saudis go to for their weapons, for the nuclear power, for any new technology, because for the prior, 20, 30 years, we have been the place where all of that innovation comes from. But when you send the entirety of our manufacturing base outside into foreign markets, you completely turn the United States into a shell that once was just selling ideas and thoughts. Well, we're not really that much of a military power anymore. We can just rest on the idea that in our last wars we were real strong. But the more wars that we're running into, the more it looks like China's actually going to be the one who has to carry this particular ball. Conversely, the Saudi-US relationship has been increasingly frayed in recent years. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman initially put forth a public image as a reformer, liberalizing the country's policies on women's rights and criminal justice. However, the 2018 assassination of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been catastrophic for both the Crown Prince's public relations offensive and relations with Washington. The rift intensified after President Biden, who has said the assassination should make the kingdom a pariah, took office. And as you can see over here, Saudi Arabia and UAE leaders reportedly declined calls with Biden amid Ukraine crisis. So they've been declining his calls, and now they're talking with China about possibly selling oil in Yuan. And this is where we are. Inflation's rising, the dollar is losing buying power, and Saudi Arabia is considering selling our only bargaining chip to China. The new multipolar world will not be a fun one. Just because the United States has a lot of skeletons in our closet doesn't mean you want China and Russia in charge, because we at least have to pretend to do the right thing. When China takes our spot, they'll be fine openly buying slaves on the international market, and they know that might makes right. All the rest of the world has to do is find a way to trade oil without dollars, and our feeble little house of cards comes tumbling down, and our adversary countries know it. Back in 2001, Saddam Hussein started trading oil using euros, and immediately after that we found WMDs and a reason to depose him. The same thing happened to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. He wanted to have a bunch of African countries back a new currency based on gold rather than implied military might, and then suddenly it was imperative that we get rid of his evil dictatorship, even though we had made deals with him for at least a decade before, including one where he promised to get rid of his nuclear devices as long as we promised never to depose him. As soon as he gets rid of his nuclear devices, we run in to depose him. Maybe that's a reason not a lot of countries trust our word. Without everybody in the world using dollars for trade, all of those dollars will come right back home, and that's when hyperinflation really kicks in as you wake up in the morning and tomatoes have gone to like $1 million a pound. Unfortunately, the US government is less interested in actually fixing this problem than they are banning anyone and everyone who talks about it. So far, the Biden administration has done nothing to actually solve the issue, but they have been focusing all their efforts on labeling anyone and everyone actually looking at this problem honestly as a neo-Nazi conspiracy theorist. The one person on legacy media who's been making any sense at all of this is Tucker Carlson, and not even Fox News is totally backing him up. If you Google his name right now, all you see is nothing but other pundits labeling him a Putin puppet. Personally, I don't get how the highest paid news personality of all time would benefit from Putin gaining a bit more territory in Eastern Europe, but the powers that be have decided he is persona non grata, and as usual, the left has fallen in line behind the establishment. Zuckerberg, in all of his infinite wisdom, has decided that Facebook will temporarily end its rules against hate speech and threats of violence, but only against Russians, as we can see here in Yahoo News. Russia curbs Instagram over death to invaders posting rule. Russia moved on Friday to block Instagram access and launched a criminal case against its owner Meta, as Moscow fired back at the tech giant for allowing posts calling for violence against Russian forces. This new escalation follows Russia's blocking of Facebook and limiting of Twitter in a confrontation with US social media platforms that has mushroomed since its invasion of Ukraine. A day after Meta confirmed a temporary easing of its rules to allow calls for violence like, quote, death to the Russian invaders, Russia's media regulator said it would restrict access by Monday to hugely popular Instagram because it contains calls to commit violent acts, which it obviously does. Apparently, the one time you're allowed to dehumanize people is during war. I mean, didn't us as millennials learn enough from that whole Hotel Rwanda movie what we all had to watch about how dehumanizing people leads to genocides and ethnic cleansings? They're usually not that far behind when you start saying things like, death to the Russian invaders. Now, we've gotten ourselves to a point where we have nothing to offer the world as the United States. The US hegemony relies on our unquestioned power over the world, and throughout the past couple of years, we've destroyed all of what took decades to build. I honestly don't see a way where the US gets out of this and remains the singular major world superpower. No nation cooperates with us because they feel some obligation toward the type of democracy we think is best, and it certainly isn't because we spread peace and love everywhere we go. The only reason any of our actual rival countries follow our lead is out of fear, and if we can't even keep Russia from doing things we don't want, then those countries now know that our time has come. The post-World War II era of all the world's borders being static and one global family moving forward towards the stars is over, if it ever really existed. Really, we had just been holding a sword of Damocles over the rest of the nations on Earth, and now we've been disarmed. All I know is that whatever's coming, the US won't have sole control over. Peace.